Hello, good afternoon. Very nice to have this time with you today. Her Migrant Hub always wanted to try to learn more from the service providers, and in terms of migration and different professional intersections with the sector of migration, what do we need to know in order to serve people better, particularly when we are talking about forced migrants. So I'm very glad we can talk about this today with the two of you that are so invested in this work. So first, I'd like you to introduce yourself and the organization that you are working for.
So I'm Deborah Presti. I'm the Senior Director of Case Management with Catholic Charities Community Services.
Very, very happy to see you, Deborah.
Thank you.
And I'm Kelly Agnew Barajas. I'm the Director of Refugee Resettlement with Catholic Charities.
Wonderful.
So like when people are seeking to enter the United States, like what happens? Like what are the first things that happen, and what kind of systems are they in?
Yeah.
How quickly can someone get a work permit? Everyone seems to have been astonished from Governor to Mayor Adams to executive directors of different social service agencies. Like, wait, you're saying you can't get a work permit until you've applied for asylum and the asylum has been pending for 5 months.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yes, that's right. That's right. That's how it goes.
Which is what, 6 years from now?
So,
exactly.
I mean, just applying for asylum, even if you did it by yourself, would be, you have to figure it out and submit it and make sure you didn't mess it up.
And
then wait another 5 months.
And meanwhile, you need to live. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you need to live.
And you need to do the application within the first year.
You need to do the application in the first year. So all of these barriers and you have to navigate all of these things. And it doesn't make any sense because everyone is kind of in agreement, whether, I don't know if everyone's in agreement about this. I was going to kind of go right and left, but it's people want to sustain themselves. They would like to work. They don't necessarily.
They don't want to depend on.
Yeah. So it's like, well, what's the plan? We're forcing people into exploitive work situations where they can't, make a living or are going to have a hard time. And then what about their children? So if they're here with children,
fake social security cards, which is going to jeopardize their.
So all of these different systems, and of course, housing being, it's the critical level. And I can't express enough to our partners when I talk to folks in DC, even to our clients that have status, there's no housing, there's no affordable housing.
Yeah.
So what do we do when our laws are, saying we have a right to shelter law, and how are we going to implement this? How are we going to move forward with all these different barriers? So I think it just takes, we have to zoom out and rethink. And I don't know if anyone has the kind of chops to get these things done, because these are major revisions to our policies.
Well, I dare say it's more than revisions. We need a reform.
Of course, major.
Because of that,
right?
Because of the way in which we thought asylum as part of some sort of criminal activity besides everything else. The way we treat people. And then, all our demons came back to haunt us because now you have hundreds and thousands of millions of people basically here with no ability to know what they will do, in 5 years from now, or in 1 year from now, which is very problematic. But, that goes back to the funding issue. When you don't have allocated funding, it's much harder because you depend on pilot projects. Right. And that's okay. But are these pilot projects then be used to bring services to scale? It's okay, we can have a pilot, we can prove, we can have the data and show that when you give work permits to people, everything else seems to go much better, right? But then what do you do with that? Do you really start giving work
what
permits?
is actually going to happen? Well, this is also the issue that I've had with the numbers that we're seeing is okay, if we have the border is everywhere, it's a small pilot, 75 people or 100 people or whatever we were referred last year 130,000 people. Now, how do we choose those 100 people? What is this? What kind of a system is this? So you have to kind of question
It's
What does this
unmanageable.
even mean? What does this even mean when you choose 100
Yes.
out of 130,000?
And then we use the language, the most compelling of the compelling. Well, they're all compelling.
Yeah.
But then it
Who's
gets
the
into
most
the,
compelling and the
the
eligibility.
eligibility
Yes,
of-
exactly, exactly.
really,
So
I
just-
think this can be an opportunity, but at the same time, the left's response to this has, in my opinion, also been a little unsatisfying.
Yeah, a
So
little.
it's been,
nicely said.
you know,
Yeah.
okay, it's posturing on this, on the other side of saying like, okay, we're gonna now, all of a sudden, you know, allocate resources, scrounge around in the state budget and the various budgets and look for little buckets to see what we can do to throw at this population. What's the sustainability plan
Yeah,
here?
exactly.
You know, we're again to this, you know, disconnect of providers being asked to like, well, how are you going to sustain this program and, you know, years into the future? No, we need funding to do this long term. You know, you can't start something and someone's going to be seeking asylum for 4 years if we're going to work with someone. You know, what's the plan? Like, what's the model that we have to put in place? And if this becomes about politics, where it's like, we're doing this year because of the election cycle or this or that, it's like, no, like we need to invest in a plan. And I'm okay with examining whether, you know, I'm not saying we can necessarily do intensive case management that lasts for 4 years for 100,000
yeah.
people. But, you know, if you're gonna say, hey, we're gonna do, this is the baseline that we're gonna set as like, everyone is gonna get healthcare, make sure kids are enrolled in school, make sure that they're connected with the PCP like Deb was talking about, like move up the time frame for jobs, and that's all we're gonna do. Just commit to what you think you could do as a baseline,
And then
give
support
some
it.
resources. Maybe it's information referral, maybe it's resources, maybe it's, there are cases that need to be escalated, that need more intensive help. You know, make a model and do it, like, and then decide, hey, we need to plan this for the next 5 years or whatever it is. At a minimum, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's just this year, which it very well could
Yeah,
be,
it could be.
you know, then it's just about the bus migrants and focusing on that population, not asylum seekers over time. And this funding that's coming out is more and more fractured. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, this is only for Afghans, and this is only for Ukrainians, and this is only for this, and this is only for that. That is not good for resettlement. It's not good for service providers to say, no, let's provide services to people who
But that-
need them.
But that doesn't go to the root cause.
Yeah.
The root cause is like, okay, let's look at what forced migration
Right.
is caused by and
Right.
address those issues and see.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're just patching
Yeah.
it based on
We are.
nationality, maybe.
Yeah.
Not
And
even.
it's like what catches people's attention that day, you know, in that, in Congress, oh, we're gonna push this through, this got support, this doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's like not how.
So eligibility criteria is
Yeah,
really what you're
yeah.
talking about, but it is its own barrier.
Yeah, I find myself, you know, very frustrated, often very, you know, for lack of a better word, like we were on the train, angry
Mhm.
about like how these policies are designed, rolled out, implemented by people who have never
No
been
idea.
working with another person
Yeah.
in this context, who have they don't have to do, you know, to juggle the data input, the case file, the clients, the calls, all the different systems to use. So I do think we need to make major strides there in so many different ways of like, you know, how can programs work together? How can we design things to make them more just simple, like easier to use?
Yeah.
So there's just so many levels of problems there to try to tackle.
And that fluid communication between the direct service workers and the people who are doing the policy and vice versa. Nothing getting gridlocked.
Yes.
Ideally, there should be a
keep-
feedback loop.
But
Yeah.
there's gridlock. There's always gridlock, and there's gridlock for good reasons.
Mhm.
I am.
Why do
very-
you think? Why do you think that?
Well, I think right now we have gridlock just in communication because we're all way stretched too thin.
Okay.
And so I know I've been guilty of getting an answer to something or identifying a need, trying to bring what the front line staff are seeing, for example, in a waiting area at the navigation center,
Mhm.
bringing that to the people in leadership positions who are interfacing with the city. Be mindful that a lot of the folks that are at the navigation center are not the decision makers.
Mhm.
So there's this effort to communicate through our kind of people who are in more leadership positions than myself, with those people in those other leadership positions. And by the time all of that happens, the person who's doing the work at the front desk has been waiting 3 or 4 days already.
Yeah.
So what do? They take matters into their own hands.
Yeah.
They handle things themselves. And they execute as though they know a policy, whether it's a direct service policy
Mhm.
or whether it's a larger policy about who's eligible for services and what's being done by lawyers and, you know, what they need to know about their legal case, whether they're taking that on and providing misinformation because of the lack of information that we provided,
Mhm.
or, you know, more simple kinds of ways in which to just give people the information they need about where to get their services.
Yeah.
So it gets very big, it gets very messy. And I've been a culprit in that because I can't get an answer quickly enough.
Yeah.
And I also can't get the importance of what those folks at the front end have to offer.
Yeah.
And make them really be the folks that are listened to.
Those that, you know, that we have to report to, funders and policymakers and government entities, and, you know, in our case, USACB, which is our National Resettlement Agency, Albany, et cetera. What's their obligation to hear what we think, right? And I can say as much as I want, but they have no, they don't have to do anything with what I say. I mean, I'm lucky that they listen. I'm lucky that I have their ear,
Mhm.
but I
There
have
is no
not,
structure.
I have not seen that there's a formal structure to say, this is kind of what we are seeing in this given policy as it's being rolled out, as it's being implemented. Now we're seeing, you know, just this morning at our staff meeting, brand new fallout, I would say, for like, you know, of this implementation of relying very heavy on a sponsorship model with Ukrainians, and now Venezuelans
yeah,
will also
yeah.
have the same. So these things are not straightforward. Like it seems as though they want to say, this is a success, no questions,
We will
no
apply.
comments, like this is perfect. We're very happy with how this has turned out, you know, and then it gets into politics of like, well, Biden has done this, we made our goal. And we don't want to hear about any problems. We don't want to hear about
It has to be successful.
that's to be successful. And I'm saying, I also want it to be successful. So let's talk about where it's falling short and let's make a plan, like given the fact that we have $900 million as a nation. So it's not like we have, you know, no resources to work with in this particular sphere. So it's very frustrating that there's kind of a closing your ears, closing your eyes response, even when, you know, we have things to say, you should be listening. We should be
Although this,
soliciting this feedback.
so just listening to you, I mean, like on one hand, I'm getting very, very energized because I feel there is so much that you bring to the table that we are in good hands. I mean, we can start thinking, but on the other hand, the issues seem to be unsurmountable at so many levels. And as you said, there is still this disconnect between the people up there, right? The ones that are making the policies, and then the people that need to implement them on a daily basis, and the population that they are meant for, it's completely left out. So I'm thinking, okay, like if you're looking, we have this crisis on our hands right now, and it could be an opportunity. I learned in my life and in my career that many times crises are opportunities. It depends on how we use it. But for now, this is a crisis. So what do you see as some of the most problematic issues that we need to watch for and prepare over the next, let's say, 6 months, because winter is coming, you know? So what do you see? What are some of the top challenges that you think social workers in particular, but, you know, practitioners working in this sector together with advocates and policymakers should focus on? And I'm referring to asylum seekers strictly.
Sure.
You just alluded to it a few minutes ago. We cannot take our eyes off those folks who really do hate this population. We can't take our eyes off that. And we have to make sure that the folks that are in the classroom are not, if this, then I'm in, but if this, I'm not in. We have to make sure that all of our interns in the field are very mission driven, and we have to catch, whether it's countertransference or it's what they're hearing at their dinner tables on Sunday, we have to make sure that is addressed. We can't take for granted that we are all kindred spirits. We are not. And we have to address that, and that can be done in the social work schools.
And that's another major issue that I see from my end, because we keep hearing from some of the asylum seekers activists that we are working with. So first of all, there is rumor out there that's not true, or it maybe it is part of it, it's true, but it's not understood in the context. Like one of these rumors was, oh, people are getting free housing. When we came here, we had nothing. It's like, no, people
yeah.
are not getting free housing.
Yeah.
You have to understand that. Should we have designated housing for asylum seekers? I think we should. That's a policy issue, but we don't. But then the feeling is what is happening if only the people that were bused in the city are being taken care of. And
Mhm.
here I am. I mean, we have
Yep,
cases of
that's right.
people being here for 5, 6,
Yeah.
7 years, still waiting
Yep.
for their cases to
Separated
be,
from their kids.
Yes.
And, yeah.
or like just trying to make ends meet and like really not feeling that they get anything.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Yeah,
right.
another big issue.
Yes.
Like you don't want to
Hitting
fix this.
roots.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So this is a major,
exactly.
major like issue right now in almost every national issue on resettlement. Even
Yeah.
people who have status right now, the hierarchy between what you get if you're a refugee, how much you got in direct cash assistance if you were an Afghan
Versus
And-
a
Yeah.
Ukrainian.
versus
Yeah.
a Guatemalan family
Yeah.
that might have
Right.
had this
Yeah.
week.
Right,
So versus the Ukrainian, also like people have assumptions about that Ukrainians are given a lot more and they're actually not because of they're relying on the sponsorship model.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
all
yeah,
a
yeah.
mess, also just not like putting at the very forefront the needs of our staff and our workers and our
Yes,
volunteers and our
yes.
interns, like, we can't go and keep doing this. I mean, you've talked about some of the stresses on you, on other staff,
Right.
and getting maybe even temporary workers who need
Yes.
so much information. They need such an orientation. It's so overwhelming. It's so, and from my staff, like from what we've been through, basically pre-Trump up through now, like the past 7 years have been insane, like really, really insane, from having gotten death threats to resettlement providers
Yeah.
at the big,
Yeah.
before the election with Trump and Clinton, like, through then, I still haven't processed the stuff that happened during family separation completely
Yes,
because of how bad that was, like how deeply we have this sense of moral injury and
Mhm.
the pain that I felt personally, and then also all of the staff
Yeah.
and like the lengths that they went to. So anyway, and plus the pandemic layered on that, more of this, more of that,
So
Afghans, Ukrainians. So I mean, I really worry about people.
That's another, I think we need to have another talk
Yeah.
just about that, because
Yeah.
as you were talking, this was on my mind too,
Yeah.
but it came back again and again. What do we need to do to support people
Yeah.
that are doing the work on the front line in these conditions? With
Yes.
all these moving pieces and all these challenges, right?
Right.
And yet they are doing the work.